I can't wait for this one. And there is some question, Jerry, here as to whether or not to continue this rivalry. This is the last year that it is guaranteed for. I know you see immense value in it for a couple of reasons. Elaborate on that if you would.
Yeah, and I don't think USC and Notre Dame are the only ones in this position. You look at Iowa, they play Iowa State, Washington plays Washington State, Oregon plays Oregon State. And I say that to say with 9 conference games, this is like 10 conference games for those particular schools. I do think that one great reason to keep the USC-Notre Dame rivalry from USC's point of view is this. And I think this year is a great example. First of all, in a 12-team playoff, SC should always be in the conversation every year. They should always be one of the best 12 teams in the country. That's their history. That's their expectation. And in most years, they meet it. So this year, they weren't in the top 12, obviously. But they can get into the playoffs if they continue to win. They continue to play like they did last week. Beating Notre Dame, whether it's in LA every other year or in South Bend this year, could be the game that puts a USC team that isn't ranked high, a victory against them could get them in the playoffs. So I think that's one of the reasons in nowadays football. I understand the coach's point of view. We play 9, and Coach Riley hasn't said this, but I have to think that some USC people believe this. We have to play 9 games in the Big Ten. No one else is playing other than the 3 teams I mentioned, maybe Iowa State and Washington and Oregon. No one else is doing this. And I think it's a game that long-term has got a lot of tradition, but practicality, I think it really is needed by USC. And I think this year is an example. USC has Oregon left. If they beat Notre Dame and Oregon and they keep winning and keep playing like they did last week against Michigan, they're going to be one of the best 12 teams in the country.
Honestly, they could afford to lose one of those games, Notre Dame or Oregon, if, again, if you win the other one, because it gives a huge feather in your cap. And if you lose one of those games, you'd be a 2-loss team. But, man, you'd have a great win, whichever game it is, to point to. It gives you an opportunity to solidify your resume, to enhance it for the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. Now, the Trojans come in, Jerry, with a lot of momentum. I mean, coming off, I think, their best performance of the year. What impressed you the most about their win over Michigan?
Well, Jade Mayava is the leader of the team. He's totally fit for what Lincoln Riley wants to do offensively. So in his second year in this offense, he's never been as good as he was last week. Now, he threw 1 pick, but he's clearly the leader. He clearly is a great fit. They're a balanced offense. They can attack you with the run and the pass. Defensively, they held Michigan, I want to say, to under 300 yards. So I think this version of USC going to South Bend is the best version it's been this year for sure, and maybe one of Lincoln Riley's best teams at this point since he's been there.
Now, we'll see whether they can continue to run it. Obviously, the running back injuries are a huge concern with Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders both out for the game. But, man, King Miller, walk-on redshirt freshman, was exceptional. So we'll see whether they can continue that balance you were talking about. And then a huge challenge, no doubt, against Notre Dame, who is playing really well. C.J. Carr has been phenomenal here last few years. Feels like their defense is figuring it out as well. So just 1 loss for SC. The same is true of Nebraska, back in the rankings this week and trying to stay in that playoff conversation, Jerry. They have a really interesting game here against Minnesota, a series that the Gophers have absolutely owned in recent years. So what jumps out to you about this opportunity here for the Huskers?
Well, I think for Nebraska, it starts with the defense. John Butler, who's the first-year defense coordinator, and he was on Matt Rule's staff prior to this year. I think he is a great play caller. He's not afraid to pressure. He'll do it at the right time. And if you look at Minnesota's offense, they early in the year with Drake Lindsay, a young quarterback, they were bothered by pressure early in the year. Now, they've obviously gotten better, and it takes time for a young quarterback to get used to pressure. So I think the key matchup is the Nebraska defense against the Minnesota offense, especially when Minnesota wants to throw the ball. Defending the Nebraska offense, I think it's going to be the same every week because they're a pass-first team. If you can stop the run with a limited number of defenders in the box, it gives you more help in the back end. And if Minnesota can do that, then that would be a way to try to slow down the Nebraska offense. They ran for a bunch of yards last week. They had one 50-yard run, which kind of slants the rushing numbers, but they can run the ball. But if you can stop them from running it without adding someone to the box like you do against a traditional offense, that certainly would help. PJ's team's coming off not their great effort last week. It's a game in Minnesota. I just have a feeling that PJ's going to press all the right buttons and have his team at an emotional high. So I think Nebraska's going to have to really be ready to play.
He has certainly pushed the right buttons in this rivalry. As I mentioned, Minnesota has had the upper hand of late. They have won the last 5 games here against the Huskers. We'll see if they can keep that going. What about Penn State going to Iowa? We're going to talk to Matt Millen here in a bit, but just mentality-wise, Jerry, for Penn State, in the absence of James Franklin here, kind of trying to move on when a lot of their goals for the season, frankly, are not reachable anymore. You've got a backup quarterback now. How do you approach this?
Yeah, I know we're going to talk more about it after Matt, and I'm anxious to do that. But from strictly a football standpoint, I think the best news is it's an away game. They're away from all the noise on campus and around town Friday and obviously Saturday. But remember, not everybody on your team travels. Only the best players travel, or they're too deep. I don't remember. I'm not even sure what the travel squads are now. But I do know that the core players obviously go to away games. And I think that'll help Penn State players deal with this. I don't know how much people know how connected James Franklin and most coaches are to players. And so this is really tough emotionally. And, you know, the NIL and the portal and all that make it even more complicated. And so my guess is simplify both game plans, try to get the players to put the distractions behind them, and then, you know, obviously do the best you can. But I think the best thing they have in their favor ever is they're away from the noise of State College.
Just think how close they've been. I mean, they've lost 3 games. They've lost them by a total of 12 points. I'm just not that far away. The Oregon game is the most obvious example. Just one play goes differently. Right. You win that game, and we're talking about Penn State in such a different manner as the way we're talking about them now. You mentioned getting away from campus. I suppose from the point of view that you're talking about, that is the good news, and I totally get that. The bad news is you go to Kinnick Stadium in a night game, and it's an Iowa team that it feels like is starting to figure it out. Obviously, absolutely demolished Wisconsin. We know the Badgers are struggling, but what stands out as you watch Kirk Ferentz's team right now?
Well, I want to go a week before the Wisconsin game when they played Indiana. That's the 3rd-ranked team, and they played them toe-to-toe, and it was as close a game as possible. And what it showed me about the Indiana team is that the line of scrimmage, which wasn't where it needed to be last year, was going to be there this year. And when they went to Oregon, obviously they proved that. So you're going to play an Iowa team that's built from the line of scrimmage. Now, again, Penn State should be built at the line of scrimmage as well. They have that kind of talent. So depending on the line of scrimmage and who wins that battle, I think gives them an edge. Mark Gronowski is playing better than he has earlier in the year. They seem like they're a more balanced offensive team as far as you're talking about Iowa. And the emotional part of Penn State, you know, I mean, it's just so hard to figure what it's going to be like. I mean, it could be win one for Coach Franklin. I mean, we really don't know. I mean, it's hard to figure that. Things don't change much in Iowa City, as we all know. And so it's going to be a tough game, and it's going to be a tough line of scrimmage game. And defensively, the last game, they shut out the opponents. So this is probably the best Iowa team this year so far.
Yeah, Iowa giving up just 78 points here through the first 6 games. And to your point, I mean, look, Mark Gronowski, they're not going to open up this offense other than Wisconsin. They're the least explosive team in the Big Ten, but they've certainly been good enough. And if you run the ball like they did last week, that opens up a lot. And we know Penn State has struggled mightily here to stop the run. A fascinating game. And again, we're going to talk to Matt Millen here in a bit. We'll get his insights on what's next here and how Penn State moves on. Our big stat brought to you by Gatorade, focusing on the amazing story that is Indiana, up to number 3 now in the AP poll, highest spot ever after the win over Oregon at Autzen. The Ducks were ranked number 3 coming in, making it the first ever road win in school history over a top 5 team, an attempt number 48 to pull it off. The magnitude of the accomplishment not lost on IU offensive lineman Carter Smith.
I think going into it, all of us just wanted it to be another game. It is really special when something like that happens, you know, a win that IU hasn't really had in a really long time, a top 5 road win. They don't come easy for any team. And, you know, we put the time in, we put the work in. I think we all banded together as a team for, you know, as long as we could. You know, we got fall camp, spring ball, summer lifts, everything, you know, correlates into each other, and it all meshes well once the time comes to play the game. SIG is a big tear off the rear view mirror guy. You know, it's time to move on to the next one. You know, we got the brass spittoon this week. We're excited to play Michigan State at our home stadium. It's going to be a good one this week.
Well, it figures to be a tremendous scene, and Big Ten Tailgate will be there live from Indiana 2 full hours to experience the game day excitement surrounding those third-ranked Hoosiers. The fun begins at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 Pacific on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. And Jerry, before we get into breaking down the game, I mean, it's just amazing. The atmosphere figures to be off the charts. It just, each week, it seems like this story gets better.
Yeah, Rev, I want to be the first one to say this. When Coach Signetti visited us last year at the Indianapolis before the championship game, and he said to me, you and Howard, I might see you back here later in the year, and we all kind of chuckled only after he left. Come to think of it, he might only have been a year off.
I know.
Yeah. He might be back there in the championship game. Yeah, I mean, obviously, the big story is how you get ready for the next game. And I just have a feeling that Coach Signetti knows how to do that. But I can't imagine what the scene's going to be like for when that team takes the field right before the game on Saturday. It's going to be literally like it's probably never been in the history of the school, and the players will really enjoy that and find it very gratifying. But they've got to be ready to play the game, obviously, and Coach Sig's going to take care of that.
Yeah, I have no doubt he'll take care of it. I mean, I think you always worry about a team not being highly motivated and experiencing a letdown or whatever it is, but it just feels like no team is immune to that. I'm not suggesting they're immune to it. I'm just suggesting that he seems to have a real knack for being connected with his team and pushing the right buttons. They've won 12 straight at home, which is the longest home winning streak in school history. The Spartans, meanwhile, are in a funk, Jerry. I mean, they started 3-0, and it felt like, okay, you know, year 2 under Jonathan Smith, they're starting to get their legs under them, and it's headed in the opposite direction here. And now you got to take on, I think you can make an argument, the best team in the country playing at home. What's the strategy here for Michigan State to try to hang around and have a shot in this one?
Yeah, I think you simplify things, especially on defense. Indiana's offense is pretty direct. I mean, they run the same plays. Their strength is their execution, their toughness, and Mike Shanahan, the offensive coordinator, calling the right play at the right time. They don't have any secret plays. They're not really doing anything different than most teams that run RPOs and run a similar offense. So I think Joe Rossi defensively can be really pretty basic and pretty simple. The one thing you don't want to do when you're an underdog like this is go in with too much defense, too much pressure, and now a team that has more talent than you do starts having a bunch of big plays. The morale of your defense just goes down, and you just have no hope. So keep the ball inside and front. Try to slow down this attack. Make sure you're doing a good job calling the plays based on the tendencies that they've showed coming into the game. On offense, do everything you can to not have Aiden Childs 7 yards deep behind the center, behind and down in distance. Because if it becomes a sack fest, it's really going to deteriorate in a hurry. He's a young quarterback who early in the year looked really good in this offense, which he's been in for 3 years. But lately, because of pressure and because of not having much run game and defense, he's really struggled. You have to protect Aiden Childs. Run screens and draws on 3rd and long. Throw the ball on 1st and 10 if you want to throw it from 7 yards deep behind the center. He's better on play action. Move him on boots, and I'm guessing that's going to be Jonathan Smith's thinking.
We saw Childs being helped off the field there. Again, he's kind of questionable for this week. Jonathan Smith didn't entirely commit to whether or not Childs would be in the game. But to your point, Jerry, whoever the quarterback is, they got to protect him. They've given up the most tackles for loss per game of any power conference team in the nation. As for the team that Indiana just beat, Jerry, in Oregon, they are going to Rutgers. Before we look ahead here for the Ducks, do you think what happened in Eugene was more about how good IU is, or was it more about maybe Oregon isn't quite as good as we thought they were?
Well, I think it's always going to be a little bit of both. IU, and we've been saying this all year, Coach Signetti told us what the problem was last year. When we played the big boys, we looked different. He solved that problem with 3 offensive linemen in the portal and 4 defensive linemen in the portal and whatever else he's done that we don't know. And so, we didn't know what to expect when Indiana was playing a team like Oregon. But let's remember, both teams had byes going into that game. And I say this all the time because of experience. What you do during a bye week is one of the biggest, most important, most impactful decisions you'll make all year. A head coach stands around and watches the offensive coordinator call plays, watches the defensive call plays, says a couple things to the team. If there's no game management issues, that's all a head coach does during a game. But what he decides to do during the off week is critical. So maybe simply put, Coach Signetti did a better job having his team ready after a bye than Coach Lanning did. I mean, I don't know what else it could be. Coach Lanning has since said, I wish we had run the ball more and so on and so forth. But again, I go back to the byes, and I think that probably had something to do with it. Coach Signetti outbuyed Coach Lanning.
Well, now Oregon has to travel all the way across the country to take on Rutgers. You look at the Scarlet Knights team, though, Jerry, man, they are having a ton of defensive issues. It just doesn't feel like Oregon is the team you want to see coming to town when your defense is struggling, particularly an angry Oregon. What do you see in terms of the matchup here and what Rutgers would need to do to hang around?
Yeah, well, we anticipated this going into the season when we looked at Rutgers' schedule, which, I mean, is a very difficult schedule. What we didn't anticipate, and you've already mentioned the defense, we didn't anticipate the defense being as weak as it has been. We didn't anticipate the special teams being not as good as Rutgers is. I mean, Greg Schiano is, he loves the special teams. They're usually really good. He's a defensive coach. So the two surprises are that the defenses are playing better and the special teams aren't playing better. And now it's his best offense. I felt like going into the season, this might be his most talented team facing the most difficult schedule he's had. And that could be playing out right in front of us.
Yeah, they moved to great against Washington, nearly 500 yards of offense. They had 3 empty red zone possessions, which really cost them. But again, you're giving up the most yards per play of any power conference team in the country. It's just really hard to win. To your point, your margin for error is just so slim on offense, even if you do have what is, and I would agree, I mean, it's certainly the best offense. It's the most dynamic offense that he's had, no question, in his time on the Banks. So that one doesn't seem all that close on paper, and frankly, neither does number 1 Ohio State going to Wisconsin. We can talk about the Badgers and all the challenges they've had, but Ohio State, the players know that the team they're going up against isn't having a great year. Ohio State, was good last week. Sure, they were great on defense. The offense is maybe still a little bit of a work in progress. But how do you approach this if you're Ryan Day?
I think you put the focus on your team and not the opponent. I mean, the players know how much Wisconsin's struggling. And so I think a fair thing to ask your players is individually, if you can play your best game that you have played this year, we're going to come out of this game with a win, but we're going to come out of this game a better team. I think that's what you do with teams that are so much better than the opponent. You make it internal, not external, because you could say whatever you want about the Wisconsin team. The players nowadays watch more tape than any previous generations of college football players. They know what a good player is. They know what a good team is. They know that they have a much stronger, better team than Wisconsin does. So how do you motivate it? You just say, this is going to be my best game. When I turn that video on Sunday and watch it, although I think players will probably watch it Saturday night like the rest of us nowadays, when I turn that video on, is it my best day? Did I take the right step better than I did the last 2 or 3 games? So I think that's the attitude for Ohio State. I don't know what else it could be.
That's a brutal spot, no doubt, for Wisconsin to be in. I mean, you're reeling, and now you got the #1 team in the country coming to town. We talked at the outset of the year about how difficult Wisconsin's schedule is, and it is playing out that way, Jerry. But a game that they had really circled was that Iowa game after the way that it went last year, and it went worse this time. I mean, you lose 37-0. Luke Fickell described himself as dumbfounded after the game. Now with the schedule that they're facing here the next few weeks, like, what do you do? How do they get this thing to a point where they can at least be competitive?
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the schedule, right? They're going to play Ohio State, Oregon, Washington, Indiana, and Illinois. I mean, this is what we knew going into the season. We just didn't expect Billy Edwards. Sorry, we didn't expect Billy Edwards to be hurt. We didn't expect the new offense that Jeff Grimes implemented. Was it going to be able to be good because they lost their starting quarterback? So, what do you do, Rever? I mean, all you can do is practice hard, hope that your team has some pride in what they do, hope the opponent that's better than you makes some mistakes, and hope that if they do make mistakes, you can take advantage of it. I mean, it's a tough situation. The Wisconsin whole program is an interesting story. I don't think it's as simple as they're not a good team. I think you have to reboot that thing and look at it after the season and see where you go.
Yeah, it's really tough. It's tough to see. It's going to be hard for Luke, too. I mean, just the fact that you're playing against Ohio State, obviously his alma mater, a school that he coached in an intervening year after Jim Tressel was let go. A really, really tough spot to be in, and we'll see whether or not his team can play well in a game that I know means a lot to him. A truly crazy season at Penn State, coming off a CFP semifinal appearance last year, a league-high 14 all-conference players back. Started the season #2 in the AP rankings, highest they've been this century. Went 3-0 in the non-conference against a weak schedule. Weren't overwhelming, but they were right there at home against Oregon. Played really well down the stretch to get the game into overtime. They lost it in double OT on a game-ending Drew Aller pick. Then it got crazy. Went on the road the next week to UCLA, a team that came in at 0-4, averaging 14 points per game. They scored 42 on Penn State, becoming the first winless team to defeat a top 10 team that late in the season in 40 years. Then this past weekend, came home to take on a Northwestern team that lost by 20 points to both Tulane and Oregon and dropped that one too, a 22-21 Wildcat win, second straight loss to an unranked team after winning their prior 34. And that was it for AD Pat Kraft, the school announcing on Sunday it had parted ways with James Franklin, moving on from a coach who went 145 in his tenure there, but lost its last 14 straight regular season games against top 10 teams. It is time for our big interview. Former Penn State All-American and Big Ten Network analyst Matt Millen joining us now. And Coach, let's start with the decision to move on from James Franklin. How surprised were you that he was let go on Sunday?
I was shocked. That caught me completely off guard. And it's because it's rare to do that. It's rare to do that in the timeline of football. And then I went back and looked at where all the numbers are now in terms of when you have to get your recruiting in. The nil stuff is taking this thing over. You have to get all your ducks in a row there. And then it just started to make a little more sense to be able to do it sooner than later if you're going to do it. And I think that's what Pat Kraft did, so he could kind of get the work done now that he needs to get done before heading into next season.
I've been saying this too over the last couple of days. It just kind of felt like an untenable situation. I mean, all the questions that James would have to answer week in and week out in news conferences about his job security, obviously the spot that it would put the players in as well. So now you look at this decision. I guess I'm just curious, like in your mind, do you see this being more about the big game failures that I had outlined there, all the regular season losses to top 10 teams, the inability to beat Ohio State and to a certain extent Michigan as well? Or was it about these last two games? Was it about, hey, this is a guy who had been so consistent and won these games he was supposed to win, and now he's losing to UCLA and Northwestern, who are unranked teams?
Yeah, I don't think it's about that. I think it's kind of has run its course. I think that's really when Pat Kraft took a step back and looked at it, especially given the fact that in James's own words, he said that he had the talent this year to be able to, and returning players coming back to be able to make a run. And I think that that was a consensus thought around the Penn State community, that this is going to be a good enough team. And when it doesn't show up, and then you're losing to teams that there's no real reason to lose to them. You're better you're better athletically. You're better all the way around. I think that was that to me. What he said, he just kind of run his course. I think that's what happened.
Yeah, and had they not lost those games, obviously he'd still be the coach and he'd be measured against how they do against Ohio State and Indiana going forward this year. But again, there was just no evidence based on what we had seen to this point this year to think that this team was going to beat Ohio State or Indiana. And that's kind of the spot they found themselves in. So now Penn State is in the market for a new coach. Based on what we've seen, and James certainly elevated the program, again, had them in the college football playoff semifinal a year ago. We're 2.5 weeks removed from having a possession to win the game against Oregon. So they were close. They just didn't quite get there. What are the qualities that you believe they should be looking for in their next coach, Matt?
Well, first and foremost, you have to be able to have a guy who can recruit. Because it all comes down to the guys who are on the field. That's the first thing. The second thing you have to be able to do, I think, is to get the right mindset. And that's not an easy thing to do. So there has to be, to me, it has to be, you have to have a fight. There's a shock, right? I want to get into a fight. But that is the attitude, Dave. And you know this. We've talked about this before.
Yep.
That's the attitude you have to have when you're going into a game, and you can't leave anything left undone. You have to do all you can do. So that's an attitude, and that's something that you have to foster. I thought that we were kind of missing that at times. And then I think you have to be more physical up front. Really, when I'm watching the Penn State team this year, they're getting beat at the line of scrimmage, and there's no excuse for that. And can they get better there? Absolutely, they can get better there. And they're just going to have to just take the time to get it done.
Well, Jerry and I were talking a little bit about this earlier, and I'm curious on your thoughts. How do the players handle this now going forward here? I mean, you've got 6 games left in your season. All of the goals that you outlined, that to your point, James outlined at the outset of the season, saying, hey, this is what we're shooting for. Those goals have gone by the wayside. You're 3-3. You've got a really difficult schedule starting this week going to Iowa City. How do you approach this if you're the very talented players on that roster?
So it's not difficult. It's really very simple. You take one play at a time. You take one game at a time. You don't look past anything. You do what you're capable of doing, what you're asked to do. That's what you do. So if your job is you're a down lineman and you have to keep the guy off the linebackers, that's what you do. If you're a linebacker and you're a guy who's going to have to attack and control a gap, that's what you have to do. So it gets broken down to the simplest form, and if you do those things collectively together, you'll have a good defense and good offense. And I think it's also a little complicated now with Aller out, and then they have Gronkmeyer coming in. That's not an easy thing for this kid to do as well. So you're going to have to rely on your run game. It'll be interesting to see exactly how they play, but if you have any aspiration of moving on to the next level, and even if you just have any pride, you're going to give it all you have. You have to. It still comes down to the individual player. Never once in all my time playing did I ever rely on somebody else to get me ready to play a football game. It didn't matter if it was in high school, college, pro, whatever it is, it's still up to you.
Fascinated to see how these guys react this week, again, starting with a very challenging night game at Kinnick Stadium. Matt Millen, always appreciate you. Thanks for spending a little time with us and lending your insights on a topic that you know quite well. Thank you.
All right, David. Good to see you. Take care of yourself.
Likewise. Jerry, interested in what you took from that conversation and what you make of what Matt had to say.
Yeah, I have several comments. First of all, I was shocked as well that it happened, just like Matt was. I question the timing of the firing for a few reasons. One is, who can you hire right now that you couldn't hire after the season? Obviously, you can't hire anybody right now because anybody that you would want to coach at Penn State is not going to just leave where they are. If you ask the players, if you said to the players, we're going to let Coach Franklin go, do you want him to stay or do you want him for us to change? I think that's a fair question. I'd like to know what the players would think. I'm going to tell you the next step in firing a coach now. You're going to have a team walk out on the university at some point. If you don't involve the players in the decision, not that they make the decision, but how to handle the decision, I'm going to tell you within the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to have a college football team that says, you fired the guy who was in my house, I'm close to him, I don't believe in this, and I'm going to move on. The other thing I'd like the new coach to say to whoever's doing the higher impact craft is, how long do I have to win a national championship? I mean, I'd like a timetable. You know, maybe less than it took James before he got fired. So I would like to know that. And then the last thing I'll say, Rever, is do we have at Penn State the same amount of money, revenue sharing, NIL, all the things that we talk about almost constantly? Do I have the same bankroll that the last 4 or 5 national championships have? Because if I have to do that to keep my job, I just want to have it to be a fair fight.
Well, they had a lot of money to keep around the players they kept around this year. I mean, there were a bunch of guys who could have easily.
So if they have enough, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, where we go from here is the question. But to fire a coach at this point after being there that long without even asking the players, that's going to be a rabbit hole as we go forward, because there's other college players right now thinking about if this ever happened to them, and I think they're going to be of the opinion that I don't have to play.
I hear you. I just think it was an impossible situation either way. I mean, once you lost those games, once your goals are gone, you essentially knew that this was going to happen, and you would have been asked about it every single week, and James would have had to go to a news conference every week, and the players, again, I use the word
they lost in the semifinals last year. If I'm a sophomore on that team, it wasn't this year national championship or bust. It was the time I played in a national championship or bust school. And we used to say, man, I wish we could have a conference. We could win a conference because we can't win the national championship every year. So when I was a sophomore, I was in a national championship or bust program. I had my junior year to maybe win it. I had maybe my senior year to win it. So when you say national championship or bust and you have a 3-3 team that's underachieving, that doesn't mean that if I'm not a junior on that team, we can't win it next year.
Right. Yeah, I hear everything you're saying. It's a difficult situation to be in. But to your point, I mean, there's no question of what is going to be asked of the next coach. It is to beat the absolute elite teams in this league namely Ohio State, but the rest of them as well. Again, can you beat Oregon? Can you beat Michigan, which they didn't do very frequently? You know, he's won
And they
4
should
games
be able
against those
to.
2.
I'm not,
Yeah.
They have the capabilities. I thought this was the best roster that we had seen in our 18 years. I'm not saying they can't or they shouldn't. I'm just saying, I tell you, you start telling young people that, you know, their coach, because he lost 3 games, isn't going to be their coach anymore. I mean, you lose, you know, you lose the feeling you have for the university too. You feel like, you know, you're just there to win football games, and personal relationships doesn't mean anything. The only way you can validate a relationship, evidently, is to win a national championship. You think those guys are going to come back for another game when they're graduating and when they become very successful people, and someone from the development asks them for money and they say, "No, I'm not giving you any money. You fired my coach."
Yeah. I don't know. It's a challenging
You fired my
situation.
coach in the middle of the season. Is my point.
I understand.
Everybody knows about coaches
I hear what
get
you're
fired.
saying. I think there's 2 sides to it, but I understand and appreciate all of your points.